So Jesus says 4 words that changed their entire life. 4 words that changed their whole view of church and leadership and what Jesus is using for them. 4 awesome words, not so with you. Hey, you know how the rulers of the Gentiles lorded over them and those who are in authority are called the benefactors? Not so with you. That's not the way I work. That's not what this kingdom is about. And so if you want to lead that way, you can lead that way, but you're not going to lead in the kingdom that way. You will be outside of my kingdom if that's your identity. Not so with you. You can get that tattooed on your arm. Buy a t-shirt with that. Let that be the motto of your life. I mean, I read that and I just think, Jesus is saying the world is in this direction. That's their identity. That's how they live. I want you to go this way. Like, I want you to have a complete different worldview. In fact, he says, instead, let's look at option 2. Option 1, there is no option 1. Let's look at what is really your only option. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. He's saying that the number 1 value of the kingdom is servanthood, is service to others, is living for others, is giving of yourself for the benefit of other people. For it's letting the benefits flow from you to the people that you lead. That's what a leader does. Jesus is saying that His church does not exist to serve you, but you're here instead to serve her. That's what He's saying about the church. That's what He's saying about His bride, that it does not exist to serve us, but we exist really to serve her. He uses 2 words, servant and slave. The word for servant literally means a waiter of tables. And the word for slave literally means slave. Slave means slave. It was a title that you wouldn't want to take for yourself. I mean, a servant was someone who worked for someone, but a slave was someone who was owned by someone. In his book, Not a Fan, Kyle Idleman writes this. He says, a slave has no rights. A slave has no possessions to call their own. A slave in Jesus' day didn't even have a personal identity. The slave doesn't get to get off time for the weekend or get the clock out at the end of the day. A slave does not get to negotiate a better wage. And yet, as you read through the rest of the New Testament, this is what you'll find. That the apostles, the leaders of the church, have now as their title, bond slave of Jesus Christ. Like Paul introduces the letter to the Roman church where to be a slave in Rome was less than human, and yet he introduces himself to those people as Paul, slave of Jesus. I mean, you read Peter's letter, his second epistle, and he doesn't introduce the second epistle, Peter, best buddy with Jesus. There at the Mount of Transfiguration, I have the t-shirt to prove it. Preacher at Pentecost. 3,000, yes, you heard that right. 3,000 people got saved on that day. That was me. He says, Peter, slave for Jesus. When James, the half-brother of Jesus, writes his letter, writes his epistle, he doesn't say, James, half-brother of Jesus. I'm not saying I'm divine or anything, but some of it rubbed off. Okay? He says, James, slave to God and my Lord Jesus Christ. Like, who would choose that? And yet these guys chose for their new title to be slave. Like, I love the story of this guy. His name's Bill Bright. Many of y'all probably heard of Bill Bright. He is the founder of Campus Crusade for Christ. He founded this ministry that has literally gone over the world, in every country. As missionaries, these people have gone forth to share the gospel on college campuses, on high school campuses, an incredible ministry. He wrote the gospel tract, The 4 Spiritual Laws, that has been reprinted 2.5 billion times. That's pretty impressive. He was the guy who produced the Jesus film, which has been seen by 4 billion people in 660 languages. few years ago, he died, and if you were to visit his graveside and look at his tombstone, this is what it says. Bill Bright, slave for Jesus. That's a great identity.